It began quietly, as great catastrophes often do, with a single ship slipping through gray waters under low cloud. The year was 2031. Winter still gripped the Baltic. From the bridge of the USS Winfield Scott, a Flight 3 Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, Captain Daniel Ross studied the radar display that bloomed with echoes, freighters, ferries, and fishing boats, but also something else, shadows moving too steadily, too cleanly, too silent for civilians. Russian Navy, Baltic Fleet. For 3 weeks, NATO intelligence had tracked the buildup around Kaliningrad. Missile trucks rolling under camouflage nets, New Su. 57 squadrons dispersing to hardened shelters at Chkalovsk. But the Kremlin insisted the mobilization was a defensive readiness drill following provocations by Poland and Lithuania. Privately, NATO commanders were less certain. In Brussels, Supreme Allied Commander Europe, General Ellen Markovich, briefed the North Atlantic Council. Satellite imagery shows rail convoys moving west from Pskov into Kaliningrad. Short-range ballistic missiles, likely Iskander-M variants with cluster payloads. This isn't a drill. This is pre-deployment. Her words landed with the same chill as the February wind outside. Operation Guardian Frost was authorized 2 days later, a freedom of navigation mission through the Baltic Sea to demonstrate NATO's resolve and ensure commercial lanes between Germany, Poland, and Sweden remained open. Officially, it was a routine escort for merchant shipping. Unofficially, it was a line in the water and a warning. The Winfield Scott led Task Force 62.5. USS Winfield Scott, flagship. HMS Kent, UK Type 23 frigate. FGS Saxon, German air defense frigate. ORP Slazak, Polish corvette. 3 civilian cargo ships carrying fuel and humanitarian aid bound for Riga. At 0317 local time, the convoy entered the eastern Baltic, 90 nautical miles off the Latvian coast. The sea was calm. The mood, anything but. Contact, bearing 042, range 22 miles. No AIS, low profile, the radar operator announced. Russian, Ross murmured. A moment later, the Combat Information Center confirmed visual, a Staroguschi-class corvette, Soobrazadolny, running dark. From Moscow came the first statement within the hour. Any incursion within Russia's security zone will be considered hostile. The responsibility for escalation will lie entirely with NATO. At the same time, Russian state media broadcast footage of Baltic Fleet units deploying from Baltiisk, calling it a precaution against Western aggression. In Gdansk, news crews filmed the NATO convoy's departure live, commentators comparing it to a 21st-century Cuban Missile Crisis, but colder. At 0520, the first wave of interference began. GPS readings blinked out across the task force. Communications grew garbled with bursts of static and false coordinates. Electronic warfare, classic Russian opening play. Lieutenant Kate Monroe, the Winfield Scott's EW officer, swore softly. They're painting us with Krasuka jammers from Kaliningrad. We're blind past 40 miles. Ross leaned over her console. Then we do it the old way. Eyes, radar, and guts. On the horizon, faint lights moved. Fishing vessels, perhaps, or decoys. The Baltic had become a chessboard of ghosts. By dawn, the convoy was halfway to Riga when the Kent reported 2 fast-moving radar tracks approaching from the northeast. Moments later, the tracks disappeared below radar altitude. Sea skimming. Missiles, Monroe whispered. Could be drones, Ross replied, though his tone lacked conviction. Seconds later, a burst of light flared on the horizon. Small, sharp, silent. Explosion near Slazak, shouted the operations officer. The Polish corvette reported minor damage, fragmentation impact, no casualties. Later analysis would suggest it was a Russian reconnaissance drone armed with an improvised warhead, meant to intimidate, not destroy. Still, the message was unmistakable. Turn back. Ross refused. Maintain course to Riga, he ordered. No one fires unless fired upon. In Kaliningrad, Admiral Viktor Gerasimov, commander of the Baltic Fleet, watched the same situation unfold on a wall of screens. He had received no formal order to engage, but Moscow's signals were clear enough. Deny passage was all the coded directive said. How? It did not specify. By late morning, the convoy was shadowed by at least 6 Russian vessels, 2 corvettes, one frigate, and several smaller patrol boats. Su-30 SM fighters made low passes overhead, afterburners thundering, each one closer than the last. "It's just like the Cold War," said Monroe quietly. "Except the Cold War never had Twitter." Indeed, every maneuver, every near collision, was being broadcast by embedded journalists aboard the merchant ships, live-streamed to millions across Europe. Hashtags bloomed. Hashtag Baltic standoff. Hashtag Guardian Frost. Hashtag Edge of War. In Brussels, NATO spokespeople insisted calm. In Moscow, anchors spoke of Western arrogance. And in Washington, the president's national security advisor simply muttered, "We're dancing on a knife edge." At 1,423 hours, the knife slipped. The Saxon reported sonar contact, fast inbound torpedo, bearing 178. Seconds later, alarms screamed. "Hardport. Deploy countermeasures." Ross barked. A plume of bubbles surged past the Saxon's hull. A test shot, not armed. A warning, again. But one miscalculation, one misread sensor, and the restraint would vanish. Minutes later, it did. A Russian Su-30 made another pass, too low. The jet's right wing clipped a radio mast on the Slazak. The aircraft disintegrated, plunging into the sea in a trail of fire. For a heartbeat, silence. Then chaos. Russian ships broke formation, sensors locked on. NATO vessels went to general quarters. Ross shouted into the radio, "All units, hold fire. Do not." Too late. The Slazak, believing itself under missile attack, launched a Sea-Scepter SAM. The missile, lacking a target lock, veered wide and struck the Russian corvette Boyki amidships. The explosion echoed across the frozen sea. At 14:31 local time, the Baltic War began. Missile trails carved the sky as both sides opened fire, radar seekers hunting through clouds of chaff. The Winfield Scott's Aegis system barked targets, intercepts, and counter-intercepts in rapid succession. The Kent took a near miss that shattered her bridge windows. The Saxon scored a direct hit on a Russian missile boat. Within 12 minutes, 3 ships were burning, 1 Russian, 2 NATO. Above, the contrails of Su-57s tangled with Eurofighter Typhoons scrambling from Lithuania. At sea level, sailors fought flames and flooding while commanders screamed into jammed radios. In those minutes, diplomacy died. By nightfall, Russian state TV declared NATO attack repelled. In Brussels, the alliance condemned unprovoked Russian aggression. Somewhere in between, 214 men and women were dead, the Baltic Sea slick with oil and ash. Captain Ross stood on the Winfield Scott's deck as the snow began to fall, red and white lights blinking through the fog. "We didn't mean to start a war," he said quietly. "No one ever does," Monroe replied. But the war had already begun. The first night of the Baltic War was a confusion of shadows and smoke. By dawn, the news had crossed every border. In Berlin, emergency broadcasts interrupted morning shows with grim footage. Burning ships on a gray sea, captioned, "Unconfirmed NATO, Russian naval engagement." In Moscow, the narrative was already decided, Western aggression. By mid-morning, President Leonid Voronov appeared before the Duma, his voice calm, measured, and deadly. "Our sailors have been attacked in the Baltic by NATO forces. This is an act of war. Russia will respond decisively and proportionally." Proportionally, in the Russian military lexicon, was a word that could mean anything. Within hours, Iskander launchers rolled out from Kaliningrad's forests. Satellite photos caught the moment just before the first missiles rose, a bright white lance of fire against the frost. The targets, NATO radar sites in Latvia and Poland. The first missile struck the Latvian coastal radar station at Ventspils. The blast shattered windows 20 kilometers away. The second missile hit near Gdynia, Poland, igniting a fuel depot and killing 14 port workers. The Western media called it the most significant attack on NATO soil since 1945. In Warsaw, the sirens began. General Ellen Markovich, operating from SHAPE headquarters in Mons, Belgium, received the alert at 8:47 Central European Time. Her voice was calm as she briefed the Council. Article 5 is in play. The alliance must respond. France and Germany urged restraint. Time to confirm details. Poland and the Baltics demanded immediate retaliation. Britain sided with them. The United States, after 6 hours of silence, issued a statement. An attack on one is an attack on all. NATO will restore deterrence. That sentence changed the world. Operation Northern Resolve was activated at 1800 hours local time. Objectives: secure Baltic airspace, neutralize offensive Russian assets in Kaliningrad, protect civilian populations in Poland and the Baltic states. The first wave launched from bases in Germany, Norway, and the UK. F-35s, Eurofighters, and EA-18 Growlers streaked east under electronic silence. The target list, drawn up in less than 5 hours, included radar sites, missile batteries, and command bunkers. At 22:12, NATO's first strike package crossed into Lithuanian airspace. Minutes later, Kaliningrad lit up with missile trails. Captain Daniel Ross and the damaged Winfield Scott had been ordered west to regroup near Bornholm. His ship limped, engines patched, radar half-blind. Around him, the sea was full of ghosts, lifeboats, burning wreckage, drifting buoys transmitting SOS signals. Ross sat in the dark of the CIC, watching the data feed from the task group's remaining drones. "Looks like the Poles are moving armor towards Suwałki," Monroe said quietly. "Then the Russians will do the same from Grodno," Ross replied. "That corridor's about to be a killing ground." He wasn't wrong. At dawn, Russian mechanized units from the 6th Combined Arms Army crossed into Lithuania to secure border integrity. They met the Lithuanian 1st Brigade, reinforced by a British armored company and a U.S. Stryker battalion already positioned under NATO's enhanced forward presence. The first land battle of the New World War began in the Suwałki Gap, that narrow strip of land between Kaliningrad and Belarus, the Achilles heel of NATO's northeastern flank. From the air, it looked like an inferno. From the ground, it was worse. Lithuanian Captain Tomas Vetra watched as Russian T-90M tanks emerged from morning fog, their thermal signatures flickering like ghosts through his vehicle's scope. "Hold until they're inside 2 kilometers," came the order from the British major coordinating the defense. "Then make them pay for every meter." When the shooting started, it lasted for 16 straight hours. The NATO defenders, outnumbered nearly 2-1, held the line with javelins and starstreaks until ammunition ran low. Polish HIMARS batteries fired from 40 miles away, their rockets streaking in arcs of flame across the gray sky. For a moment, it seemed they might hold. Then came the Russian artillery, thermobarics, and cluster munitions that turned the frozen forest into a storm of fire. By nightfall, both sides had taken catastrophic losses. 1,000 men dead, dozens of vehicles burning. The Suwałki Gap was no longer a gap. It was a graveyard. In Brussels, emergency meetings ran without pause. European markets crashed. Airports were flooded with civilians trying to flee eastward. The question whispered in every corridor was the same. Would Russia stop at the Baltics? Intelligence reports suggested otherwise. Satellite intercepts showed mobilization across the western military district. Rail lines out of Smolensk and Bryansk carried tanks toward the border. And then came the message that chilled even hardened analysts. Russian nuclear command units were seen leaving storage bases in Saratov Oblast. "Dispersal," Markovich muttered, staring at the satellite feed. It was what came before either deterrence or catastrophe. Meanwhile, on the sea, the second act was already unfolding. The surviving NATO task force regrouped with reinforcements. The French Chevalier Paul, Norwegian Fridtjof Nansen, and the U.S. carrier USS Theodore Roosevelt diverted from the North Atlantic. The Roosevelt's arrival changed the balance. For 48 hours, NATO owned the skies over the central Baltic. But Kaliningrad's defenses were dug deep, and the Russians had prepared for this war for a decade. At 3:02 on the third night, they unleashed their answer. From launchers hidden under camouflage near Zelenogradsk, 12 hypersonic 3M-22 Sirkin missiles rose into the air. Their targets, the Roosevelt and her escorts. In less than 3 minutes, 2 of them struck. The first hit the Fridtjof Nansen, breaking her in half. The second slammed into the Roosevelt's forward deck, detonating fuel and ordnance. The explosion could be seen from the Polish coast, a silent sunrise over the sea. Hundreds died in seconds. The world awoke to headlines that screamed, "Carrier strike group destroyed in Baltic Sea." In Washington, the Situation Room fell silent. The president looked at his Joint Chiefs. "Are we in a war yet?" General McCarthy, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, replied softly, "Sir, we already are." The U.S. went to DEFCON 2. Across Europe, reservists were called up. In Moscow, Voronov declared special defensive operations throughout the western frontier. Both sides began moving nuclear-capable bombers to forward bases. Both sides claimed it was a deterrent. Neither side believed the other. In the span of 72 hours, Europe had gone from tense peace to total mobilization. The Baltic was burning, the skies were filled with drones, and in every capital, the word no one wanted to say hung like a curse: World War. Day 5. The Baltic Sea was quiet again, too quiet. Smoke still drifted from the horizon where the Roosevelt had gone down, its wrecks scattered across the seabed like bones. The war that neither side had wanted was now fully awake. In Moscow, President Voronov convened his Security Council in a secure bunker beneath the Kremlin. His generals pressed for escalation. Kaliningrad is under siege. NATO air power dominates. If we don't act decisively, they will destroy the enclave within days. Voronov rubbed his temples. And if we strike deeper? Then they will stop, said General Yashin. They always stop when they taste pain. That belief, old, fatal, and wrong, would end the modern world. At SHAPE headquarters, General Ellen Markovich barely slept. Her staff reported that NATO's first counteroffensive had retaken parts of the Suwalki Gap, but at terrible cost. Half the Lithuanian 1st Brigade was gone. Poland's border towns lay in ruins. Russian missile strikes had hit Vilnius, claiming over 2,000 civilian lives. Markovich faced a decision no commander had faced in nearly a century. "How far do we go?" she asked aloud in the operations room. Her deputy, a British air marshal, replied simply, "As far as it takes." Operation Iron Shield began that evening, a massive air and cyber assault aimed at paralyzing Kaliningrad's command structure. Stealth bombers from the U.S. struck radar arrays, while German cyber teams flooded Russian networks with spoof telemetry, forcing enemy batteries to fire at phantoms. By midnight, Kaliningrad was dark, blind, deaf, and bleeding. NATO declared the mission a success, but in the Kremlin, it was seen as the prelude to invasion. At 2:37 Moscow time, Voronov gave the order no one thought would ever be given again. Authorize Operation Purin. Tactical deterrence strike. Limited yield. The world changed in 13 minutes. A Russian Iskander missile, carrying a 20-kiloton nuclear warhead, launched from Kaliningrad. Its target, an uninhabited training range near the Polish town of Drosko-Pomorsky, chosen to minimize casualties but maximize shock. It detonated at 3:01 local time. The flash turned night into day. The electromagnetic pulse knocked out power across northern Poland and southern Sweden. The fireball was visible from Berlin. Within minutes, global communications networks went wild. Social media flooded with shaky videos, half of them fake, all of them terrifying. #nuclear war trended worldwide. In Brussels, NATO's headquarters went to full lockdown. The alliance's nuclear consultative group convened via secure link. General Markovich argued for restraint. Respond conventionally. Show we won't be provoked. But others disagreed. Poland demanded retaliation. The United States could not remain silent. The president's advisors offered 3 options: full nuclear reprisal, unthinkable; tactical equivalence, a matching strike on Russian soil; massive conventional retaliation to cripple Russia's Western forces. After an hour of dead silence, the president chose option 3. At dawn, NATO unleashed Operation Hammerfall, the largest coordinated air campaign in modern history. B-2s, F-35s, and long-range cruise missiles struck across the western military district, Pskov, Bryansk, Smolensk, and the approaches to Moscow itself. Russia's response was immediate. Air bases in Norway and Germany were hit with conventional ballistic missiles. Cyber attacks crippled European banking systems and knocked satellites offline. In the chaos, a second Russian nuclear launch was detected, this time from Belarusian territory. Its target was presumed to be a NATO logistics hub in eastern Poland. Missile defense crews in Romania intercepted it over western Ukraine. The interception prevented Armageddon, but the fragments of the warhead fell over Lviv, spreading radiation across the city. The moral boundary between restraint and apocalypse was dissolving by the hour. Captain Daniel Ross, still aboard the battered Winfield Scott, Received the flash message at 6:42. Possible nuclear detonation. Continue defensive patrol. He read it twice, then looked out over the empty gray sea. Monroe stood beside him, face pale. "Do you think it's over?" she asked. Ross shook his head. "Not yet, but we're running out of world to fight over." They weren't alone. Across Europe, soldiers, sailors, and civilians waited for the next flash that might never come, or might end everything. By the seventh day, both sides had lost the ability to control escalation. Automated defense networks misread radar shadows as incoming strikes. Drones and counter-drones fought in skies so crowded with debris that satellites could no longer track them. Over Riga, a dogfight between NATO and Russian fighters spilled into civilian airspace, resulting in the destruction of a Latvian airliner. In Berlin, mass protests filled the streets, demanding peace. In Moscow, state television declared victory, even as the lights flickered from power shortages. The world economy collapsed in real time. Markets shut down. The internet fractured. No one trusted anyone, not even the machines designed to keep them safe. Then, suddenly, it stopped. After 9 days of war, silence fell. A ceasefire, unscheduled, unofficial, and unspoken, emerged simply because both sides had nothing left to fire. Kaliningrad was gone, reduced to ruins by airstrikes. The Suwalki Gap was a wasteland. Half the Baltic fleet lay at the bottom of the sea. And somewhere in the ashes of Drosko, a crater still glowed faintly with blue light. In Geneva, frantic diplomats met under candlelight, power still unreliable, and signed what the media would later call the 10-day peace. Neither side claimed victory. Neither side believed it would last. Captain Ross was among the few survivors brought home. Reporters met him at the pier in Portsmouth, cameras flashing. "Do you think the war is really over?" one asked. Ross paused, then said quietly, "Wars like this don't end. They just stop for breath." He looked out toward the sea, that same cold, gray horizon where it had begun. In the distance, ships still moved, relief convoys, rescue teams, cleanup vessels. But beneath those waters lay the wreckage of an age, the final proof that even in the 21st century, humanity could still destroy itself in the span of a week. The official death toll was never agreed upon. Estimates ranged from 200,000 to over 1 million. Entire cities darkened, entire histories erased. The world rebuilt, of course. It always does. But the phrase born from those days, whispered first by sailors who'd seen it all, would endure in every textbook that followed. The Third World War was short, swift, and final.